Welcome to Ghostlore Chronicles. Tonight's tale is about a ghost train, a locomotive that roars through the mountains, though no tracks exist. Some call it legend, others swear it's a curse they've seen with their own eyes. So join me as we begin this haunting journey. I never imagined that a casual hiking trip into the hills outside Chicago would change my life, or that it would drag me into a story I would later struggle to believe myself. I've always been fascinated by urban legends, the kind that linger in the margins of towns, whispered by those who think they've seen too much. But even with that fascination, nothing could have prepared me for what I, or anyone in my group, would hear that night. It began on a crisp October morning. The leaves had started turning golden, painting the landscape in fiery shades, and the air smelled faintly of rain. My friends and I had planned a weekend getaway, seeking a break from the relentless grind of city life. Chicago had a way of making people feel trapped in steel and glass, and escaping to the outskirts, to the quiet hills, felt almost necessary for survival. We parked our old Jeep near a trailhead that wasn't on any official map. I had found it in a dusty forum where hikers shared hidden gems, the kind of place no tour guide would ever tell you about. The trail was narrow and overgrown, twisting through clusters of birch and oak trees, leading toward an abandoned stretch of hills where old mining towns once thrived. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered reading stories about a spectral train in these parts, a ghostly engine that no one ever saw on the tracks, but that people claimed to hear. At first, I dismissed it. Urban legends were stories people told to scare themselves, nothing more. But as we hiked further, the familiar sounds of nature, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the occasional caw of a crow, were joined by something unsettling. A faint whistle carried over the ridges, distant, melodic, almost sorrowful. I stopped mid-step, glancing at my friends. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. They nodded, uneasy smiles crossing their faces. "Probably just a train somewhere in the city," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. But there was no train, not within miles. The city's lines didn't stretch this far into the hills, and even the freight lines stopped long before this trail. The sound persisted, echoing oddly as if it was bouncing off invisible walls. There was a rhythm to it, a haunting cadence, like it was calling us deeper into the hills. As we pressed on, the forest seemed to close around us. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, despite the afternoon sun still hanging high. Every now and then, a sudden clatter of metal rang out, not from the rocks or fallen branches, but something else, something mechanical. My stomach twisted with a mix of excitement and dread. By evening, we had reached a clearing atop a ridge. The view was spectacular, the city skyline distant, barely more than a sliver of lights and shapes beneath a blanket of twilight. But the serenity was deceptive. The whistle returned, closer now, louder, its notes chillingly precise. My friends froze. "I swear I can see smoke," Jenna whispered, eyes wide. "Like a train, but it's not on any tracks." I squinted into the dimming light, heart hammering. There it was, or at least a vague silhouette shimmering at the edge of the ridge. A train, impossibly old, steam curling from its engine, its cars dragging behind as if cut from shadow. No rails, no tracks, yet it moved with horrifying purpose, a spectral locomotive gliding through the air. It lasted only moments before vanishing, leaving behind the sound of its whistle echoing into the night, a lingering vibration in my bones. We ran. Not down the trail, down was madness, but into the denser part of the forest, driven by a fear I had never known. Our laughter, once careless and teasing, had turned into gasps and terrified murmurs. But even as we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching us, unseen, something that knew we were intruding on its domain. When we finally emerged back near the Jeep, the city lights looked ordinary again. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet, inside me, a nagging certainty had taken root. The train wasn't a trick of our minds. There was history here, something buried in Chicago's past, something that had refused to die. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I researched old railway lines, mining towns, and urban legends tied to the hills outside Chicago. That's when I found references in yellowed newspaper archives. Reports from the early 1900s about a tragic train accident, a locomotive that had derailed in the hills, killing dozens. Witnesses described seeing the train again, long after it should have vanished. The stories were inconsistent, eerie, but countless. Some said the train roared through at night, carrying passengers long dead. Others claimed it was a warning, a harbinger of death for those who ventured too close. And the more I read, the more I realized that what we had seen wasn't an isolated hallucination. Others had heard it, too, hikers and locals alike, their experiences terrifyingly similar. A ghost train with no tracks to guide it, appearing in the hills near Chicago. That night, unable to sleep, I recorded my thoughts. My hands shook as I wrote down every detail. The sound, the silhouette, the metallic echo of the cars, the smell of burning coal in the air. Even though there was no engine, I knew I had to go back. I needed to see it again to understand what haunted those hills. I didn't tell my friends. Most would have laughed, dismissed me as having imagined it all. But I knew the truth. Something was alive, or something that once had been, and it hadn't finished with the hills yet. The days that followed were restless. Every evening, I found myself wandering through online forums, digging into local history, and reaching out to anyone who might have seen or heard the same phenomenon. That's when I stumbled upon a series of obscure blogs and old newspaper clippings that mentioned the so-called phantom locomotive of Chicago's outskirts. Most of these accounts were vague. People claiming to hear whistles in the night, or the distant rumble of wheels where no tracks existed. Some even insisted they had glimpsed the train gliding over the hills, fully formed, only to vanish before they could approach. One blog post caught my attention. It detailed the story of a man named Harold Jensen, a retired railway worker who claimed to have heard the train on multiple occasions during his hikes. According to him, the train only appeared to those who were paying attention, almost as if it were testing them. He described the engine in meticulous detail, an iron beast with glowing windows and black smoke that seemed to twist unnaturally in the air. Jensen had photographs, though blurry, showing faint outlines of what looked like a locomotive suspended over the treetops. I decided to contact him. The phone call was brief but chilling. "You can't force it to appear," he warned. "You have to be quiet, respectful. And even then, it may not let you leave." His voice trembled as he spoke, and I could hear the weight of years of fear behind his words. "It's tied to the accident, to the souls of those who never left the hills. They are trapped, and the train is their passage, their warning. Don't go unprepared." Despite the warning, I felt drawn back to the hills. A few nights later, I convinced Mark and Jenna to join me again. This time, we came prepared with cameras, audio recorders, and flashlights. The sun had just set when we started our ascent, the sky painted with streaks of crimson and purple. Every rustle of the wind and snap of a twig seemed amplified, and the forest felt alive in a way that was both enchanting and terrifying. Hours passed uneventfully until we reached a bend in the trail where the air grew cold and heavy. That's when we heard it, the distant whistle. This time, there was no denying it. It carried a resonance that vibrated in our chests, a mournful tune that seemed to beckon us forward. The shadows shifted as though the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. "I see it," Jenna whispered, her flashlight catching a shimmer in the distance. Through the fog, a faint outline of the train appeared, gliding slowly above the ground. The steam hissed and swirled, and the metallic clang of its wheels echoed eerily, even though there were no tracks beneath it. My hands trembled as I raised my camera, desperate to capture evidence. Mark tried to move closer, but the ground beneath him seemed to pulse. He froze, staring wide-eyed as the train approached. The whistle screamed once, long and piercing, and then everything went silent. No steam, no noise, only the faint glow of the city lights far below. It was gone, but its presence lingered, a cold imprint in the air that made our skin crawl. That night, back at my apartment, I listened to the recordings. The audio captured a deep, rhythmic rumble, interspersed with the whistle. Occasionally, I thought I heard faint voices, mournful cries, or whispered warnings. It was impossible to tell whether it was real or my mind playing tricks. Couldn't sleep. The image of the train haunted me in every shadow and reflection. I started to dig deeper into Chicago's railway history. The derailed train from the 1900s had a tragic story. A passenger train carrying miners and their families had skidded off the tracks during a storm. Some perished instantly. Others vanished without a trace. Locals spoke of disappearances near the hills over the decades, always attributed to accidents or natural causes. But patterns emerged. The missing individuals had reportedly heard the same whistle, had seen the same fleeting shadow of a train. I couldn't shake the feeling that the train was not just a legend. It was something conscious, something that marked those who strayed too far into its territory. And the more I learned, the more certain I became that we had been chosen, or at least observed, by whatever haunted those hills. It was during this research that I met Lucy, an elderly historian who had lived in Chicago her entire life. Her home was filled with yellowed maps, photographs, and journals documenting the city's forgotten corners. When I asked her about the phantom locomotive, she didn't flinch. Instead, she beckoned me closer and whispered, "The train is a bridge, not just a ghost. Those who see it glimpse something they weren't meant to, and sometimes it follows them home." Lucy's words echoed in my head for days. Sometimes, it follows them home. At first, I thought she was just trying to scare me. But soon after that meeting, little things began happening that I couldn't explain. At night, in my apartment, I would hear a low rumble beneath the floorboards, like distant wheels rolling over metal tracks. A faint whistle would drift through my window even though I lived miles from any active railway. And sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I swore I could smell coal smoke and scorched iron. Mark and Jenna had started avoiding me. They said they felt off ever since that second hike. Mark confessed over the phone that he'd been waking up at 3 a.m. every night to the sound of a train horn, even though his apartment overlooked a quiet suburban street. Jenna sent me a text one morning, frantic, saying she'd seen a shadowy figure in her hallway that smelled like burned wood. She refused to talk about the hills anymore. I decided to go back alone. Armed with a heavier flashlight, extra batteries, and a digital recorder, I drove out to the hills just before midnight. The road was empty, the city behind me a fading smear of light. By the time I reached the trailhead, fog had rolled in thick and white, curling low to the ground. Every step felt like I was wading through another world. The woods were silent, unnaturally so, as though the insects and owls had all fled. About a mile into the trail, the air changed. It grew heavier, damp with a metallic tang. My flashlight beam caught on something ahead, a glimmer of steel half buried in the soil. As I knelt to brush it off, my stomach lurched. It was a fragment of railway track, ancient and rusted, jutting up like a broken bone. There were no tracks on any map, but here it was, proof of the long-forgotten line. The soil around it was scorched black. The whistle came again, low and mournful, winding through the trees. My heart pounded. This time it was closer, not distant. I felt the vibration in my chest before I heard the rumble. A deep, rolling thunder like a train approaching from under the earth itself. The fog thickened until I could barely see my own hands. Shapes flickered inside it. Faces, maybe, pale and gray, their eyes hollow. The sound of wheels screeching on rails cut through the silence. Then suddenly the train emerged. It wasn't like before. This time it was solid, towering, its iron body glowing faintly in the moonlight. The windows burned with dim yellow light, and inside I saw silhouettes moving. Figures in early 1900s clothing, staring out with expressionless faces. Steam hissed around me, hot and damp, and my skin prickled. One of the windows slid open. A hand reached out, pale, impossibly long fingers curling toward me. A voice whispered my name. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My recorder slipped from my pocket and clattered to the ground. The train's whistle screamed again, deafening, and the entire scene seemed to stretch, like reality itself was warping. The figures inside the train leaned closer to the windows, mouths moving in unison. I couldn't hear what they said, but their eyes locked on mine. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished. The fog thinned. The tracks were gone. Only my recorder remained, blinking red, still running. When I played it back later, the sound chilled me to the bone. The whistle was there, yes, but underneath it, voices. Dozens of them. Some crying, some laughing. And in the middle of it all, my name, whispered clear as day by something not human. Couldn't sleep that night. The smell of coal hung in my apartment even though my windows were closed. Every time I blinked, I saw the hand reaching out from the train. I began to wonder if Lucy had been right. Maybe the train had followed me home. The next day, I went back to see her. She was waiting for me, as if she knew I would come. Without a word, she led me to her study and pulled out an old leather-bound book filled with handwritten notes and photographs. In one photo, taken decades ago, a young woman stood on the same ridge where we'd seen the train. Behind her, faint and blurry, was the same locomotive. Lucy traced a finger over the image. "It doesn't just haunt the hills," she said. "It marks you. It's a passage for the lost. And once you've seen it, it knows who you are." Her words were like a verdict. Once you've seen it, it knows who you are. I sat there, staring at the old photograph, my pulse racing. The image was faded but unmistakable. The same outline of the train, the same curling smoke. My stomach churned. "What does it want from me?" I whispered. Lucy didn't answer right away. She closed the book gently, as if it were fragile. "It isn't a single thing," she said at last. "It's many. A collection of lives cut short. A bridge between where they were headed and where they never arrived. But the bridge has to stay open, and it needs witnesses. The more you look, the more it sees you. The more it follows." I left her house shaken. The city felt strange as I drove back through its sleeping neighborhoods. Every traffic light glowed a little dimmer. Every alley looked like a tunnel of smoke. That night, my dreams were full of rattling rails and echoing whistles. I woke up drenched in sweat at 3 a.m., the sound of metal scraping echoing faintly through my apartment. Mark called the next day. His voice was ragged. "I saw it again," he said. "In my hallway. The whistle was right there like it was inside the walls." And then, his voice cracked. Someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, there was nobody there. Just the smell of burning coal. Jenna had stopped answering her phone entirely. Her last message to me had been 2 words. "It's here." I decided I couldn't run anymore. If the train had marked me, if it had marked us, then hiding in my apartment wouldn't change anything. I had to face it, understand it, or die trying. So I planned a final trip to the hills. Not at dusk, not at midnight, but at the hour when the veil felt thinnest, just before dawn. I packed heavier gear this time. A high-powered camera, a digital audio recorder, a small drone, and a backpack full of batteries. On a strange impulse, I brought along an old railroad lantern I'd found in a thrift store the day before. Its glass was cracked, but when I held it up to the light, it seemed to flicker faintly on its own. The drive out to the hills felt endless. The fog came earlier than before, curling low across the road. The trees along the roadside looked like they were leaning in, watching me. The moment I stepped out of the car, the air was colder, sharper, carrying that same metallic tang. I could taste it on my tongue. The trail was different now. Where once it had been narrow and overgrown, it now felt like a corridor. A tunnel of birch and oak whose branches reached toward each other like skeletal arms. My footsteps were muffled as though the ground itself was absorbing sound. Halfway up the ridge, I found the fragment of track again, but it was no longer buried. It stretched into the fog, glinting dully in my flashlight beam, a ribbon of rust disappearing into white nothingness. I followed it, heart hammering. Each step echoed like a hammer striking steel. The whistle came then, louder than I'd ever heard. A D. The whistle came then, louder than I'd ever heard. A deep, resonant cry that shook the air. The fog churned and parted, and the train appeared. Fully formed, massive, its black iron sides glistening with condensation. My fingers tightened around the cold rail of the car. The metal throbbed faintly under my skin, like a heartbeat. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and the world around me blurred. I could hear the whistle again, but now it wasn't distant. It was inside my head, rattling my teeth, echoing through my chest. The door yawned wider, a black mouth opening into nothingness. I glanced over my shoulder, hoping to see the trail, the trees, the faint glow of the city far below. But there was nothing now, only fog, thick and shifting, swallowing everything. The forest had vanished. The ridge was gone. I was standing on a narrow strip of earth suspended in a gray void, the spectral train before me like a god of iron and steam. The voices inside grew louder. I could finally make out words. Come aboard! Come aboard! The faces in the windows were pressed so hard against the glass that it looked like their skin might break. Some of them were crying. Others were smiling with empty eyes. One figure, a man in a soot-stained conductor's uniform, stepped forward from the darkness of the car. His features were sharp, his eyes black pits, his smile a row of crooked teeth. He raised a gloved hand and beckoned. My lantern flickered violently. The greenish light danced over the iron monster's body, revealing strange symbols etched into its sides. Names, dates, fragments of prayers. Some of the names I recognized from the newspaper archives, the passengers who had died in the derailment more than a century ago. Others were unfamiliar, but as I scanned them, my blood turned cold. There, near the bottom, was my name, and Mark's, and Jenna's. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The conductor's smile widened. The whistle screamed once, a sound so piercing it bent the air, and the ground beneath me cracked like glass. The edge of the void crumbled under my boots. I had to decide. Step into the car or be swallowed by nothingness. Something inside me snapped. I hurled the lantern into the darkness of the car. It burst into a flare of green fire, illuminating rows of empty seats and corridors that stretched impossibly far, lined with flickering lamps. For a heartbeat, I saw figures walking down those aisles. Miners, women clutching children, men in suits, faces twisted in fear, eyes fixed on some invisible horizon. And then they all turned toward me. "No!" I shouted, stumbling backward. "I'm not one of you." The conductor tilted his head. For the first time, I heard his voice distinctly, separate from the chorus. It was low, guttural, and full of ash. "You have seen. You have heard. You are already aboard." The ground gave way. I fell, but instead of hitting earth, my boots clanged against steel. I was standing on a floor of black metal inside the car. The door slammed shut behind me with a hiss of steam. The windows went dark. The train lurched forward, throwing me off balance. Outside, the fog dissolved into a rushing tunnel of light and shadow. I could feel motion now, the weight of the engine pulling me somewhere far beyond the hills. The passengers stared at me silently. Some wept, some smiled. The conductor walked down the aisle, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He stopped inches from my face, leaning close enough that I could smell coal dust and something older, like a graveyard. "Every witness rides," he whispered. "Every rider remembers." The whistle blew again, and the train plunged into darkness. I don't know how long we traveled. Time had no meaning inside. The windows showed places I couldn't recognize. Abandoned cities, endless forests of skeletal trees, rivers of black water under blood-red skies. At some point, I realized the other passengers weren't alive. Their faces had begun to blur, their eyes hollowing out. One by one, they turned to ash and drifted upward like smoke, their seats emptying, but the train never slowed. I must have blacked out. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the ridge. The sky was gray with dawn. My lantern was gone. My recorder lay at my feet, still blinking. There were no tracks, no train, only silence. My hands were stained with soot. Back in the city, life went on. People bustled down the streets, cars honked, trains clattered over the elevated tracks. But the whistle still follows me. Sometimes at night, I see the flicker of a headlamp at the end of my hallway. Sometimes, in my reflection, I see the conductor's eyes staring back. Mark is gone. Jenna too. Their apartments stand empty, their belongings left behind as though they'd simply stepped out. The police think they disappeared on some trip. I know the truth. They boarded. Maybe they never got off. And I know my turn is coming. The phantom locomotive marked me. I can feel the vibration under my floor at night. The whistle grows louder with each passing week. It isn't just a story. It isn't just a legend. It's a passage, and it wants me back aboard. One night soon, when the fog rolls in and the world falls silent, the train will stop for me again. And this time, I don't think I'll be able to resist stepping inside.